This is Ground Affected. My name is Brent, and welcome to getting your finger jammed in the door when you close it. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this Dr. Octopus by 3D Wicked. In fact, there is a link for them in the description below this video. And as per usual, I need to make sure that you understand if you don't click the like and you don't leave a comment in the little section where comments are left on the bottom of a YouTube video, then your next print will most probably fail. And nobody wants a failed print, so make sure you leave a like, make sure you subscribe, and share the video with your grandmom. Also, I have a Patreon if you'd like to support the channel anymore and become a part of one of the best group of internet painters that ever existed and be able to join the channel in Discord where we talk about everything. Also, sometimes I make a vlog specifically for those in Patreon for that extra added content, bruh. And now, let's just stop with the faff and get straight into the video. What you may notice is that the base is yellow. That's because I printed this in PLA and I used a filler spray paint to paint the base of this to hide the layer lines from printing it on the FDM machine. And then I primed everything black. I used Vallejo surface primer, and in my case I'm using it because I don't want to have to paint things that are hidden behind or underneath areas that I just can't get to with my paintbrush. So black is the best base to use because that will look like it's painted even though it's unpainted. For the arms of Dr. Octopus, I'm going to use Shining Silver. It's one of the Army Painter's airbrush paints, and I'm going to use a little bit of their airbrush medium to make sure that it flows a lot easier through my airbrush. Metallic paints tend to get a little bit clunky and they can block up the airbrush, so make sure to use some kind of thinner or even water just to make it go through and flow a little bit easier. Now, starting with the portrait, I'm going to use the exact same process that I use for every other portrait. Starting off with the darkest color, I'm going to lay a base coat down and make sure that that's fully dry before I start to slowly work my way up through the colors. I realized that the silver on the table was making the camera go unfocused, so I removed that and we're back to painting a face again. And you can actually see it. The last step seemed like quite a large jump, but that's mainly because once things have dried, they tend to change colors slightly as you move along, but slowly go through the entire process that I've outlined in previous videos on how to paint skin tones and faces on characters like this. A little secret that sometimes needs to be added, as well as grimoire purple, I also like to use a super thin layer, a glaze essentially, or even a tint of yellow. This just helps add a little bit of light into the skin, because when you add the grimoire purple, it gives it a bit of a shadow and it helps to make sure that light looks like it is bouncing off of the skin. Working on the glasses, I printed these in a clear green resin and then I airbrushed Nuln oil over the top of them. I did this in a few layers. Originally it was way too light, so I ended up making them a lot darker towards the end of the video. Painting his hair is pretty straightforward. It's also just a solid base coat of a dark brown, and working on the eyebrows, the only trick I can give you for eyebrows is kind of stipple it in, but almost in like a brush stroke kind of way. You want there to look like there is movement in the eyebrows. I also took a bit of a flesh shade and I added this just around the eyes and inside of the nostrils just to give a little bit more depth. And then working on the eyes, I did my usual trick of black as a base coat, and then I'll go over the top of that with white later on. While that was drying, I painted the teeth in. Usually for whites or even off-whites and things like that, you need a couple layers, so I will work between the layers as I'm going along. And then obviously working on the color of the lips and just giving a bit more life into the lips and making them look like more realistic. Painting the frame of the glasses was a little bit tricky, but if you use a good brush control technique, it shouldn't be too difficult at all. I painted in the pupils for him, and while those were drying, I added a little bit more detail around the eyes, just on that bottom bit of the eyelid, just to create a little bit more high spots, as well as I used a bit more highlighted colors around the forehead and things like that. A little trick I can give for dry brushing darker hairs is to use a metallic color. For example, in this case I used a copper metallic color as the first layer of dry brush. You do need to go back in again though and dull that down, and in order to dull that down I used a wash. That's just a brown wash that I use just to help dull down the metallic flakes, but it does help make it look a little bit more believable and a little bit brighter on the edges of the hair. Painting the pants, all I did was painted down a layer of brown. This was fur brown, and keeping the black underneath, this is where it starts to show how it's almost like cheating in a way, because I've now got shading and I didn't even have to put a shadow onto the color. So using black sometimes is really helpful, especially if you want to try get through something a little bit quicker than usual, but still have the same high quality look to the piece. On the base, I used a plain grey, and I sprayed a bit of a gradient from the front to the back, obviously to give it a bit of depth. I used a little bit of Nuln oil from the back sprayed as well, so that also helped with the depth. And I dry brushed the rocks just so that the rocks were a little bit of different color. They wouldn't be the exact same color as the base. And I put a black rim all the way around the base. I then painted the skin tone on the neck on the inside of the coat, and then I started to spray a little bit of light coming out of the little lights on the end of his arms. And I highlighted all the little rivets on his shoes just to make sure that his shoes didn't look too plain and boring. Now it's time to work on his coat, and for the coat I used a lighter brown, and I basically just pretty much sprayed that everywhere, all the places that obviously needed to be brown. I then used the dark silver metallic paint from Acrylic and painted all the metal pieces, including the little zipper that goes up the inside of his coat. Once that had all dried, I masked it all off because it'll be a lot quicker for me to spray the green of his coat on rather than to paint it by hand. And I took a little bit of time to mask this off, probably around half an hour or so just to mask it off, but that time pays off in the amount of time you save in actually painting with a paintbrush rather than painting with an airbrush. The airbrush is just a tool that really makes things a lot easier and quicker and helps you get through areas a lot faster than if you're using a brush. I sprayed a simple green over the top, and then I used a lighter green to highlight just the shoulder areas and help them to stand out a little bit more. I then unmasked the whole piece and worked on the shirt. The shirt I decided to make black based on a bunch of images that I had found on the internet. I then glued one of the mechanical arms onto the base. This is just so that I knew that it wasn't going to fall apart while I'm working on other bits and pieces here and there. I have to do a bit of dry brushing in order to give a little bit more texture to the piece, and a couple of other things here and there, but gluing that one tentacle in just really helps cement the model into the base. I then went back and touched up all the areas that I wasn't able to paint with the airbrush, and then I started putting the piece together and making sure that everything works the way that I needed to work, and came back with the dry brush and sort of dry brushed areas that I felt needed a little bit more light hitting on them. And then I glued in the rest of the tentacles, and that's the end of painting Dr. Octopus. Hopefully you found something in this video that inspired you or made you think a little bit more deeply about your own painting and model printing. And if you did, make sure to share the video with a friend, as this can really help the algorithm pick out who would like to see my videos and make this channel grow more and more. Also, we're nearly at 5k. I never thought I would get to that kind of a number, which is still a very small number in the grand scheme of things, but we're nearly at 5k. And in the beginning of the video, I spoke to you about a Patreon. Yes, that's a place where you get nothing. However, I have been giving something, which is extra content. Very small amount of extra content as I can fit it into my schedule. But speaking of Patreon, I absolutely have to shout out the new patrons we got this week. Gary Lowry, Giuseppe Tindaro, Arena, Patrick, Chef PC, Kusha, George, Ashcraft. I properly need to thank you dudes for your absolute support on this channel. It means the world to me. This is what helps keep these lights branding me and making sure that I can still continue making videos. I need to mention that there is a merch link in the description below. Last video, the merch link didn't work. This video, the merch link most certainly does work. If you think you would like to support the channel even further and you would like to purchase some of the merch that I've created, then go and follow the link because the link is in the description. This stuff has been drawn up by ROXY Rose. Make sure to check her out as well. And of course, we're at the end of a video. And when we get to the end of a ground affected video, there is only one thing we can possibly say, and that is please, if you don't like any of it, just click the dislike button and f*** off. Well, at least most of the stuff in this video actually made sense.